This
Afternoon,
conference will now be recorded.
good morning, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I would like to welcome you on behalf of ISTA to the web webinar. No, it's more a web conference on the ISTA Stabilized Plant List, which is renewed every 6 years. When I make it short, we can discuss after Melanie's presentation. Melanie Shorey, who's the chair of the committee, will give her presentation. Welcome, Melanie. Mm,
Hello. Good
Okay.
morning. For me.
Yeah. Um, we are a little bit ahead in Europe, time-wise, I mean. Uh, I hand over to you, your presenter, and you could go ahead, and we're all very excited.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get my proper screens lined up here. All right. Can you see the acknowledgements page from the stabilized list?
We can only see your screens like babushkas made together.
Oh, okay. It's not showing the right screen. Let's see. Trying to do. Definitely don't want to share my Chrome tab. Do you have any advice on how to set up sharing so that it chooses the correct item?
Whether you share your whole screen or only the
Well,
item.
I tried entire screen, and that's what we just were. So maybe I just share the window. I might have to switch back and forth multiple times because I have multiple things to share, but we'll try this.
That looks good.
Okay. So we have the draft of the 8th edition of the Stabilized list available, and it will hopefully be approved at the annual meeting, which I will not be attending, but Ernest Allen will be presenting on behalf of the Nomenclature Committee. We just learned that his attendance has been approved. Um, for those of you who have not been through an update to the stabilized list before, it is a massive endeavor. We started working on it in July and are still making a few very small changes to it at this point, but July through December, it took much of my time and a lot of time from the rest of the committee members. So I want to take the time to thank all of them. Ernest Allen, who is our outgoing vice chair, Sue Alvarez, Michelle Chauvet, Axel Dietrichson, Carol Elliott, who has had to step down from the committee, but she participated in early discussions, Marco Hoffman, Deborah Myers, Romina Rodriguez, Diogo Tobolski, who was instrumental in setting up and facilitating discussion sections for us to repeatedly go over potential changes and their ramifications, Mauro Vaccarella, Sigyn Valgrind, and John Wiersma. One of our main challenges that I would like to go over during this presentation, especially in the second half, is coordination with the rules. In the past, we have not had a mechanism for coordination and timing for making sure that changes to the rules occurred in concert with changes to the stabilized list. We've basically been playing catch up for the last 6 years, finding a few errors every year when there are proposed changes to the rules. And one of the things I did this spring is I asked Jody for a copy of the 2025 rules, and I went through and built an index of the scientific names and found multiple items that need correction or that are now not in agreement with the 8th edition stabilized list. So one thing I'd like to discuss is what some of those changes will need to be. One of the changes that, well, we've made a couple changes to the draft list since I submitted it. One is that we have put an effective date on it for the 1st of January 2026. So it will be hopefully approved and adopted at the ordinary general meeting, and then there will be time for any corrections that we find that might be lingering, and then it will go into effect at the same time as the next version of the rules. The other item that people had concerns about, we had a couple of updates to the 7th edition after deciding that names that were added to the rules should be added to the stabilized list without the delay and the wait for the 6-year interval. And in one of those updated versions, there was a note added to the bottom that synonyms were not accepted. That has always been true. In the preface, it outlines that synonyms are not accepted. But that was not in any copy of the file that I had on my computer. It was something that was added in the formatting process. And so I heard from several people that there was concern that that footnote was not there in this edition. So after some discussion, we have added a slightly different footnote to indicate that names that are in bold are accepted and names that are in regular type are synonyms and they are not accepted. This is not a change in how names are dealt with in the stabilized list. It has always been the case that synonyms are not accepted. Okay, now I need to switch my screens and go to a different screen. So bear with me here, please.
Ernest, maybe you would like to switch off your camera.
This year I was fortunate to be able to submit an article to Seed Testing International outlining some of the changes that were made in the 8th edition. Some of what I'll be showing here is not available in the SCI article itself. However, they are available on the ISTA website. But just to quickly go over some of the changes that were made in the stabilized list. We have several corrections to the spellings of names. 2 of these were nomenclatural decisions made by the nomenclature section and the committees that evaluate proposals to conserve and reject names. One is the spelling of Datura inoxia, which has a double N, and the other is the adoption of the epithet afrum for Harpaphylla afrum. We also had authorship changes to various accepted names and synonyms. These happen with every version, every edition of the stabilized list. As we have more access to published literature, it is easier to check and see who was the first person who published a name or made a combination. If you see two authors and one is in parentheses, that means that the second author has transferred this name from one genus to a next, or from subspecies to species. So we have a better understanding of who should deserve credit for publishing the name. So those adjustments have been made. One that will probably cause the most consternation and confusion is with Cenchrus polystachyios. It turns out that the type specimen for this name does not agree with how it has been used for many, many years. So we will have to switch away from Cenchrus polystachyios because there is now a different accepted name for that. But all the others don't really, you won't really see much of an effect because it's just a change in the authorship. We had a number of changes in status from synonyms that we have decided to now accept. In some cases, those were in for specific taxa, like subspecies or varieties, that the committee decided to accept. In some cases, it's a reversion of a name that was not accepted previously, now being accepted because of an update to a classification. So we'll see that with Coleus and with Mahonia. There is a classification now that allows Mahonia to be recognized as separate from Berberis, and we have gone back to accepting Mahonia. Many of these changes had been proposed in the past for at least edition 7, possibly earlier editions as well, and had not been adopted. But this time around, the NOM committee decided to adopt these changes. And if names become accepted, generally they have synonyms that then become not accepted, or the name that was previously accepted becomes a synonym. So we see that here with Berberis. There have been additional studies of certain groups that have shown that relationships among plants that we previously thought we understood were actually incorrect. One of them that has regulatory implications is that Eichhornia, which is, at least in the US, considered a noxious weed because it can be invasive in waterways, it has now been put in the genus Pontidaria. And this is one of the changes that we had several discussions about, but in the end decided to adopt the change. So Pontidaria is now accepted. Eichhornia azurea and Eichhornia crassipes are now synonyms. So we have a list of these changes. And one of the substantial changes to edition 7 is that we had requested that laboratories, especially in tropical countries, submit proposed additions to the list, recognizing that many of the names on the stabilized list reflected the needs of countries in temperate regions, and that countries in tropical regions, which may see different weeds or have different cultivated material that is commercially available, that their needs were perhaps not being met as well. And there were a few submissions that trickled in from various places. And then we got a substantial request from the government laboratories in Brazil. And the committee did an excellent job of going through and evaluating these names and deciding to add quite a few. Many of these are names that people in temperate regions will recognize because a lot of them are weeds, and they will be present in seed lots that are encountered in many different places. Other ones are more particular to tropical countries. And if there is a single asterisk, the name has been added because of a name change. And then a double asterisk indicates that we had agreed to add a variety or a subspecies, and then we needed a parallel addition as well. So this is quite a long list. I'm not going to go over it in any detail, but just to show that we had a substantial number of additions. And we also had a substantial number of synonyms that were added. In some cases, the names that had been requested to be added were not accepted names. And therefore, we added them as synonyms and added their accepted names as counterparts. So those are most of the details I wanted to go over here. I would like to point out that there are competing classifications for some of the plants that are on the stabilized list. And I decided that it would be a good idea for us to add names that are accepted in other classifications and that you might encounter in published research or in requests, that we should have those present as synonyms, even though they are not being accepted on the ISTA stabilized list. Salvia rosmarinus is one example of that. This is still being treated as rosmarinus officinalis in the stabilized list, rosemary. There is a classification that was published in 2017 that made one genus out of salvia with over 1,000 species. There is a competing classification that recognizes 6 genera. Both classifications are valid, and we have decided not to adopt the broader classification and keep the familiar name. There are also classifications that have removed Pisum as a genus. That would be very disruptive for international seed trade to get rid of the familiar name for pea. So we've added Lathyrus oleraceus as a synonym. This is the name that would be accepted under that other classification. Okay. At this point, before I go into no, can't access my camera. All right. Before I go into the details of corrections that are needed in the rules, I would like to ask if there are questions so far. I can't see if there are any hands raised or chat comments that have come in, so I will need
If
someone
you
to
have any
facilitate
questions,
that.
please raise your hand and then we will allow you in. I don't see any. I go through it again, Melanie. Yeah, Eric, please.
I have a question. That list that you show you, is that already on the ISTA site or not yet? Of changes?
It is on the ISTA website. Let me see if I can bring it up here. Take me a moment. I believe it's on the nom page.
Oh, Nomenclature Committee. Okay.
Let's see here. Yes.
Yes, it is.
So if I share this screen,
Yeah, I see it. I found
Yeah,
it.
so under documents, other documents at the bottom of the nomenclature. And let me just see if I can share that for everyone to see. So if you're on the Technical Committees Nomenclature Committee page for ISTA, down at the bottom there's the changes to the ISTA list of stabilized plant names, and that will go over the details. Are there any other questions at this point? If not, I will switch over to the changes that would be needed to the proposed rules. And the reason that we are looking at that now, that they weren't included in the draft, is because I did not have the draft stabilized list completed and an index for the rules prepared in time to identify the needed changes and get that to Jody before she sent everything out. So because we have not had a mechanism to coordinate before, we are still trying to figure out the timing of how this should proceed. Okay, I need to change my screen. Okay. Can you see the spreadsheet that I have open?
Yes, we can.
All right. So I went through and I focused on names that were genus and species. If it was just genus SPP, I generally did not add it to the index because those names are not in the stabilized list. We do not have any genus level names that don't specify a species, variety, or subspecies. Some of the changes that are needed are purely editorial. In some cases, the authority, the authorship has not been added, and that's simply an oversight. We have a few cases of spellings being incorrect. These are just typographical errors that need to be corrected. There are some changes to authority. Most of these are new changes from the 8th edition. We do have a couple of changes that should have been made for the 7th edition that have been missed, or the authority is spelled out in full and should be abbreviated. But then there are some changes that are not, it's not clear quite how to handle them. Erebus alpina is included in the rules. It is presented as a synonym of Erebus alpina, subspecies alpina. However, Erebus alpina itself is no longer listed in the stabilized list because it has essentially been replaced by subspecies alpina. So there are several different options that we have. Mention of it in the rules could be removed entirely. It could be replaced by Erebus alpina, subspecies alpina, or we could add Erebus alpina without subspecies back to the stabilized list. One of the things that I get many questions about when we have subspecies or varieties now on the stabilized list, which was a change that was made in edition 7. Previously, ranks below that of species had not been accepted. One of the questions that I get is, if a sample cannot be identified down to subspecies or variety, what name should be used? And the answer has consistently been that you identify the sample to the lowest rank that is possible. So if that is species, then you report species. If it is genus only, then you report the genus. That is not actually a change, but the replacement of a name like Arabis alpina with Arabis alpina subspecies alpina does suggest that Arabis alpina is no longer an acceptable identification, even though a close reading of the rules makes it clear that that is not the case. So we could add Arabis alpina back into the stabilized list. If we did that, we would probably need to add the species without lower ranks for all names that have a variety or a subspecies that is now accepted. That is open for discussion. There are several other examples of this. Bromus carinatus is in the rules as a synonym of Carinatus variety carinatus, but Bromus carinatus with no variety is no longer on the stabilized list. It could be added back onto the stabilized list. We have one name here, Brassica napus, variety Napobrassica, that is not in the stabilized list. And since we are supposed to have all the names in the rules present on the stabilized list, this is one that will need to be added to the 8th edition of the stabilized list. There are names that have changed. So these Brachyaria names, these are listed as synonyms of various Eurycloa species, but the accepted names of these Eurycloa species have changed, and we also have a Berberis that has changed here. So synonyms will need to be updated to reflect what is in the 8th edition of the stabilized list. And we also have had some changes in names that are included. So Coreopsis drummondii is in the rules as being included in Coreopsis basalis. Previously, that would have indicated that Coreopsis basalis had a variety or a subspecies that corresponded to Coreopsis drummondii. However, there is no longer an accepted varietal or subspecies classification for Coreopsis basalis, and Coreopsis drummondii is now just considered a straight synonym of Coreopsis basalis. So that would need to change from included to synonym. We also have that change with Digitaria decumbens. Now is no longer considered included in Digitaria eriantha, but just a straight synonym. We have a reverse case with Eucalyptus maidenii, which was previously included in Eucalyptus globulus, but it has since been recognized as a separate species. And so it's now accepted in edition 8. Another case of a name being replaced by its subspecies is Limonium sinuatum. We now have Limonium sinuatum, subspecies sinuatum, in the stabilized list. Medicago tornata is now considered a straight synonym of Medicago italica. Sorghum bicolor has been replaced by its subspecies. One change that we did not identify that is currently causing issues is the hybrid formula here, sorghum bicolor crossed with sorghum sudanense, has been retained in the rules. However, this is represented by sorghum bicolor subspecies drummondii. This is actually a hybrid subspecies because sorghum sudanense has been determined to be a synonym of one of the subspecies of sorghum bicolor. So right now there is a lack of concurrence between the rules and what was in edition 7 and also still in edition 8 of the stabilized list in regard to sorghum bicolor, subspecies drummondii. So this needs to be harmonized so that instead of a hybrid formula, the scientific name is presented. Triticum aestivum is another name that has been replaced by its subspecies. It could be added back to the list. Brassica perviridis is listed as an accepted name, but in the stabilized list it is included in Brassica rapa. We need to have agreement between the rules and the stabilized list for this name. So I will need some sort of decision from people who know more about how this brassica should be treated for seed testing for guidance on that. We have quite a few synonyms that need to be updated. Those are, so there are 90 changes that are needed. Some of them are just corrections of typography or lack of authorities that need to be added in. These can be made editorially, but we do need, I think, input and consensus on whether names should be added back to the stabilized list or just replaced in the rules with the name that is now accepted in the stabilized list. So at this point, I would be happy to get input from attendants. Comments or questions or concerns.
Any hands to be raised? Anyone who wants to take the floor? I don't see anybody raising their hand.
Or if anyone would like to suggest a strategy for making decisions on how we achieve harmonization between the stabilized lists and the rules for the few names that really need a discussion and decision. I think we can probably agree that if a name is now a synonym, it should be updated in the rules. But if there is a name that is not in the
Eric?
rules, or if it's treated differently, then we need a mechanism for resolving that.
Eric, you raised your hand.
Yes, that you look to the OSA rules and the names in that rules. Are they changed to the new synonym?
So AOSA has its own methodology for making updates that is
okay.
entirely separate from the ISTA methods. AOSA accepts changes in line with what Green Taxonomy accepts, and they make their changes on a yearly basis. So we can, if people agree that they would like to be in agreement with what AOSA has for these names, if they're on the AOSA list, then that is one way to do that. But we have many names that do not agree with what AOSA has. Looks like Steve has a comment or question.
Yeah.
Hey, Melanie. I think many of the changes that you have in this Excel spreadsheet would be editorial, and I think it's just the ones with the yellow highlights you have on where you need a decision,
Yes.
and that decision or advice could come from the rules committee or rules committee chair within ISTA to then discuss with the membership to get input. But one of the examples you gave was the Triticum aestivum. Could you
Yes.
go to that? Could you go to that
Mhm.
line in your
Yes.
spreadsheet so that we can help understand what needs to be changed?
To find it again.
Because that's a species that's commonly traded, and lots of people will want to know what to declare on their Orange International Certificate as the name of the species tested, and has it had to change in Table 2C. So could you explain that one? So what would be the entry in Table 2C? Because at the moment, I think the entry is Triticum aestivum subspecies aestivum. Is that right?
The current entry is that Triticum aestivum is a synonym of Aestivum subspecies aestivum, which technically is not correct. From a technical standpoint, Triticum aestivum includes all subspecies. So
Yeah.
it is not
So the reason.
technically a synonym of one of its subspecies.
Yeah. So
And
so
this
for,
is one of the names. So edition 7 has Triticum aestivum subspecies aestivum. It no longer has Triticum aestivum with no subspecies. And this is one of the names that I have received multiple questions about over the past 5 years. And every time the answer from the rules committee is that if you cannot identify a sample of two subspecies, you use the species, if you can identify it to the species.
yeah. So really, this change came about when at the seventh edition,
Right.
people were trying to tell the difference between Durham
Mhm.
wheat and spelt wheat and
Yes.
ordinary winter wheat. So
Mhm.
at the time, people understood that the winter wheats had to be called east of them. Maybe our understanding at the time was wrong, and if people had a winter wheat and it wasn't a Durham wheat or a spelt wheat, it would be called now Triticum aestivum subspecies aestivum, and that was what would go on the orange, even though most people in trade would call it aestivum. If I'm correct, and I think Eric would be able to help me with that, or one of the other people that might be on the call. But so this is the difficult thing. I can also remember at that time when hordeum got the subspecies added, that created some
Mhm.
confusion for people in trade. So these are some important points for people to consider and get input from the Rules Committee as a whole and the membership too. So certainly if there's something that's being traded with an understood genus and species, we need to make sure that's in Table 2C. I think you gave an example earlier of one of the brassicas, but
Yes,
so
Brassica
those
purpuratus.
yeah, so those are just my comments. I don't know if Eric, you wanted to react to that.
I think the problem is that most people don't separate them well, but I don't know what the name is in the Triticum estimum is also in the Grin list I see. Yeah, I don't know what's easier for the people. For the certificate, it's better to do only use Triticum as listum, just only the first part.
Yes, and it's not clear that replacing the species
Yeah,
with the subspecies instead of adding the subspecies and retaining the species was the right decision. It
yeah,
might be that really we should retain the species name for any taxon where we now also accept subspecies, because as I said, technically Triticum estivum is not a synonym of one of its subspecies.
no,
The subspecies is can be considered a synonym of the species because they share the same type specimen, but it only works in one direction. So I can prepare a new draft of the stabilized list because there are a few other names that we clearly need to add that are lacking, that are in the rules, but not in the stabilized list. And we can restore these names that were removed that have caused confusion, especially for inspection and certificates. That should not be a problem.
So Melanie, I think from what you said and get advice from the people on your nomenclature committee like Ernest that are involved in certification and input from others. But I think if you can avoid confusion, if you've had a lot of questions about it in the last 5 years, it would be good to add it back.
Yes.
And I think you've got another question just come up in the chat box as well.
Let me see if I can open the
Yeah,
chat here.
it's about the amaze.
Yes, I think this is probably another situation where we should retain the species without subspecies in the list and have that as an option. As there was consensus that accepting subspecies that could be readily identified was appropriate. Okay, so for ZMAs, we have retained the species and added ZMA's subspecies maize and ZMA's subspecies mexicana. So the situation is clearer for ZMAs if you're not sure which subspecies to use. You can continue to use ZMAs. But I think we want to restore that pattern for other names where we now accept subspecies or varieties.
Any other question? Or is it clear on the amaze now? Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I see another raised hand. Steve, it's still yours or?
Yeah, so just Melanie, one of the things I thought maybe you could mention or explain to people is the link to OECD, because I know in previous editions you've added some codex to link in with the OECD names, I think it is.
Well, we are doing our best to coordinate with OECD, and I invited Stephen Flack to join the session, and I've sent him draft lists and the STI article. Most of the names that OECD is concerned with harmonizing are not necessarily ones that have been affected by changes to edition 8.
Maybe Stephen, you can say a few words to that. I see you are here.
Thank you. Yes, I've been spotted, I see.
Yeah, you cannot hide.
I'll try better next time. I'm pleased to say most of the changes we're making or planning to make this time in the OECD listing match changes that are in the 8th list of ISTA. There are one or two places where it stands out as being different. One is in the brassica species, but that's somewhat to be expected because they are a troublesome area. But the other is with the use of Pennisetum glaucum or Chengus americanus and Chengus clandestinus and Pennisetum clandestinum, where we use opposite ideas on those ones. As for the wheat thing, I think we'll be sticking with just the Triticum aestivum and not going any further down. Although we do also have on our list Triticum aestivum subspecies spelta. So I think we're somewhat in a hybrid position, but we took a decision some time ago to follow Grin nomenclature, and so we've been staying with that since that decision was made. I'm not sure if that is what you are looking for, but certainly I can see some of the discussion here is going to far deeper levels, and our interest is in labelling and in the listing of varieties to permit labelling and certification. But it would be very helpful if we were using the same nomenclature system from the point of view of the certificate that we issue and the OIC that you issue, appearing to speak about the same species.
They may speak about the same species, but with different names.
Exactly, yes. And that is not transparent to the people using the system necessarily,
Well,
particularly for untrained people like border control people and so forth, who are trying to match the certificates and think this cannot be the same lot I'm looking at here.
I can address the discrepancy between Pennisetum and Cenchrus. We discuss that every time that a new edition of the stabilized list is prepared. And given that Pennisetum is being retained for the next 10 years in Dutch horticulture, that was one of the influences in our decision to continue to use Pennisetum as the accepted name for the 8th edition.
So I was thinking only to highlight the places where we've diverged rather than to necessarily pick up on that as a deep discussion at this point, because I think that from your point of view is past at this stage.
Yes.
The listing we have is still yet to be approved by the annual meeting, so we'll see where that goes to. But I think I sent you a copy of the proposed changes, such as they were. So I think you
Yes, we've looked
had
at that.
vision of those. Yes. So I think I've finished unless there's anything else that I should be saying at this point that you were expecting information on.
No, it's all fine. Thank you for your information concerning the OECD.
But thank you for the invitation to be here. It's been very interesting so far. I look forward to hearing more of your discussions.
Any other questions, remarks? Didier? You can unmute.
Yes, I just want to mention that as we have now subspecies in the ISTA rules in the table 2B and in the ISTA list of stabilized plant name, it should be more consistent with the purity chapter, where we have in the object the identify of various species. And this chapter do not explain what to do with the subspecies. So it should be better to have some explanation.
I don't think that's really a question for the nomenclature committee.
No, no, this is not for the nomenclature. But I think there is a need to have consistent things.
Vanessa, there's also a second question from Sergio Corral on the chat box.
Yes, about no authority for triticosecale. We have not been in the habit of having genus authorities, and triticosecale is a genus where the authority has changed multiple times. There are multiple entries in the International Plant Names Index with indications that the publication was either invalid or that the same name was created more than one time. There are 4 different entries for Triticosecale just as a genus. We could add an authority, but I'm not sure that it would really serve any purpose. For the species names, it is important to have the authority because sometimes a name has been published by more than one person and the names represent different species. So same name but different species. So in that case, knowing the authorship is important because it indicates what species actually is associated with that name. Names sometimes are misapplied as well. We have authorities that show up as AUCT, A-U-C-T, which means of authors, which means that the name has been misapplied in a way that is not consistent with its original publication. And the scientific name of rhubarb is one of those that has been misapplied over many years.
Steve has a comment on the chat box which says authority names do not need to be reported on ISTA OICs or BICs. And a thank you from Sergio Corral. Anyone else? Do you have anything else, Melanie, on your side?
It would be useful to know whether Steve's suggestion of sending the short list of changes that need discussion and approval to harmonize the rules and the stabilized list, whether that should be sent to Jody.
Yes, please. And Jody
Okay.
is here. I think she can answer on herself. Jody, you were not hiding properly as
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yes, if I was not. Um, so yes, Melanie, if you'll send that to me, I'll be happy to send it to the Rules Committee for comment. Is that what we've all, I think that's what I understood about that, that there are some that are in question about how to handle it, and the Rules Committee could hopefully come to a consensus on that.
Yes, I can separate those out and draft a short explanation for each one so that the committee isn't stuck looking
Okay,
at a spreadsheet.
perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jody. Jody, if you need help on that, that's also Nadine who could help with that. We just discussed that in the morning.
Yes.
Thank you. I did get that email, so that's helpful.
Okay. Any more comments, Melanie, from your side, or any?
I would encourage people to look over the draft list, to look over the STI article and familiarize themselves with the coming changes. And of course, if people have questions about any of the proposed changes, always welcome to send me an email asking for either the reason behind the change or there are undoubtedly still a few errors in the draft list, and if anyone finds them, we still have time to make those corrections since we will be adding some names that are in the rules that are currently not in the stabilized list or the draft stabilized list.
Yes, and for those people who want to read the STI, it's STI 169, which is available online. If you did not receive it yet as a hard copy, that takes always a little longer, but it's online, so you can flip through that. And I think Melanie's uh, article is quite on one of the first pages, I think. Debbie, you're putting on your camera.
Just a minute.
You want to say something?
No.
Good. Anyone else?
Well, I was hoping that Melanie was joining. She's the group leader.
I have been unable to turn on my camera for some reason.
Okay.
It has told me I have no active cameras.
Good. Then you are the representative of the committee, and we have others here. We have the current vice chair here as well. Maybe he can join as well. The still vice chair of it. No. Ah, Diogo. Good. Thank you very much in that case. Melanie, if you don't have anything else, Ernest, hello. If you don't have anything else, Melanie, um, that's okay. That's fine. Yes, people can go to the article, which I think was helpful also this time, and we should remember that in 6 years' time when the next change is ongoing. Um, Thank you for all the information. Most of that is online or will be put online at least after the voting of it, and the new stabilized list will then be available also on the ISTA website. Um, Ernest, you want to close?
Absolutely. First of all, hi everyone, and since we're at the end, goodbye everyone. Thank you, Melanie, for taking the time to go over this with us. We'll be taking this to the annual meeting with us, and I know we have to vote on it in the rules, and we have a separate document to vote on with just a stabilized list by itself. So hope to see everyone in New Zealand in a couple of weeks, and again, thank you guys for attending.
Yeah, thank
I will say, I'm a little confused since my meeting notification said 7 a.m. Pacific. So I'm sorry, I'm late. I didn't realize that it was an earlier meeting.
Okay, thank you, everybody who goes to New Zealand. Have a good trip. And this recording will be visible on the ISTA YouTube channel in a few days' time, probably after Easter. Thank you very much, and all take care. Goodbye.
Bye.